When Duke Dominic Ashford agreed to marry Lady Felicity Whitmore, a woman he had never met, he believed he was fulfilling his duty to unite two powerful houses. But on the eve of their first meeting, doubt gnawed at him. What if she were merely another fortune hunter, seduced by his title rather than the man beneath it? Determined to know the truth, he devised an audacious plan. He would enter his own estate disguised as a common groom, observe her unguarded, and learn what she truly desired. What he overheard in the stables one moonlit night would shatter every assumption he had made, and set into motion a reckoning that would change both their lives forever. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled. Lady Felicity Whitmore had always known her life was not entirely her own. Born into the illustrious Whitmore family during the height of the Regency era, she had been raised in the grand halls of Ashwood Park, a sprawling estate nestled in the rolling hills of Kent. Her childhood had been a tapestry of music lessons, embroidery, and carefully orchestrated social gatherings, each designed to mold her into the perfect aristocratic bride. Her mother, the formidable Countess of Whitmore, had impressed upon her from the earliest age that a woman of her station had one paramount duty: to marry well and secure the family's legacy. Felicity had never questioned this path. It was as natural as the changing seasons, as inevitable as the morning sun. She had been taught to walk with grace, to speak with measured elegance, to smile demurely at suitors who came calling. Yet beneath the layers of silk and propriety, there lived a young woman who harbored secret dreams, dreams of a marriage built not on obligation, but on mutual respect and genuine affection. She read novels in the privacy of her chamber, stories of heroines who chose their own destinies, and she wondered if such a thing could ever be possible for her. When her father, the Earl of Whitmore, announced her betrothal to Duke Dominic Ashford, Felicity felt a mixture of resignation and curiosity. She had never met the Duke, though she had heard whispers of him in society, a man of considerable wealth and influence, owner of vast estates across England, and possessor of a title that commanded respect wherever he went. The match had been arranged between their fathers years ago, sealed with contracts and promises that neither Felicity nor the Duke had any say in. It was, by all accounts, a brilliant alliance. The Whitmores would gain the prestige of a connection to the Duke of Ashford, while the Duke would secure a bride of impeccable breeding and fortune. But what sort of man was he? Felicity had inquired discreetly among her acquaintances, but the reports were frustratingly vague. Some said he was stern and aloof, devoted entirely to the management of his estates. Others whispered that he was handsome but unapproachable, a man who valued duty above all else. None could speak to his character, his temperament, or whether he possessed even a shred of warmth. Felicity found herself imagining a cold, austere figure, much like the marble statues that lined the corridors of Ashwood Park. Beautiful, perhaps, but utterly lifeless. The weeks leading up to their first meeting were filled with preparations. Seamstresses came and went, creating gowns of the finest fabrics. Her mother supervised every detail, from the arrangement of her hair to the selection of her jewelry. "You must make an impeccable impression," the Countess insisted, her voice sharp with expectation. "The Duke is a man of discerning taste. He will expect perfection." Felicity nodded obediently, though a knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. Perfection. It was a word that had haunted her entire life. She practiced her curtsies until her legs ached, rehearsed polite conversation until the words felt hollow in her mouth. At night, she lay awake in her four-poster bed, staring at the embroidered canopy above her, and wondered if she would ever be more than a decorative object in her own marriage. The day finally arrived when she was to travel to Thornfield Manor, the Duke's principal seat in Derbyshire. The journey took 2 days by carriage, winding through the English countryside as autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Felicity watched the changing scenery through the window, her heart heavy with apprehension. Her mother accompanied her, offering a steady stream of reminders and admonishments. Remember to smile, but not too broadly. Speak only when spoken to. Display your accomplishments, but do not appear boastful. Thornfield Manor loomed into view as the carriage crested a hill. It was a magnificent structure, far grander than Ashwood Park, with its Gothic towers and sprawling gardens. Felicity's breath caught at the sight of it. This would be her home, her prison, her entire world. The carriage rolled to a stop before the main entrance, and a line of servants stood waiting to receive them. Among them was the Duke's steward, a dignified man named Mr. Pemberton, who greeted them with practiced courtesy. "His Grace sends his apologies," Mr. Pemberton explained as he escorted them into the grand hall. "He has been detained by urgent business on one of the northern estates. He will return within the week and looks forward to making your acquaintance, Lady Felicity." Felicity felt a curious mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief because it granted her a temporary reprieve from the inevitable scrutiny. Disappointment because the uncertainty would continue to gnaw at her. She was shown to her chambers, a suite of rooms decorated in shades of blue and cream, elegant but impersonal. As the servants unpacked her trunks, Felicity walked to the window and gazed out at the manicured gardens below. Somewhere beyond those hedges and flower beds, the Duke was conducting his business, unaware that his bride-to-be was already in residence, already wondering if he would ever see her as anything more than a duty to be fulfilled. That evening, as she dined with her mother in the formal dining room, Felicity made a decision. She would not sit idly in her chambers, waiting like a doll on a shelf. She would explore the estate, learn its rhythms, and perhaps discover something about the man she was meant to marry. The servants, she reasoned, would know him better than any society gossip. They saw him without the mask of formality, witnessed his true character in the small, unguarded moments of daily life. The following morning, Felicity rose early and dressed in a simple day gown, eschewing the elaborate ensembles her mother insisted upon. She slipped out of the manor before breakfast, drawn by the crisp autumn air and the promise of freedom, however fleeting. The gardens were deserted at this hour, the dew still clinging to the grass. She wandered along the gravel paths, past rose bushes heavy with late blooms, until she reached the stables, a long, low building where the Duke's prized horses were kept. The smell of hay and leather greeted her as she stepped inside. A young stable boy was mucking out one of the stalls, and he looked up in surprise at her appearance. "Good morning, my lady," he stammered, hastily setting aside his pitchfork. "Good morning," Felicity replied with a warm smile. "I hope I am not intruding. I simply wished to see the horses." "Not at all, my lady. His Grace keeps some of the finest horses in England. Would you like me to show you?" Felicity nodded, grateful for the boy's friendly demeanor. As he led her down the row of stalls, pointing out the various mares and stallions, she felt a sense of ease she had not experienced in weeks. Here, away from the oppressive expectations of the manor, she could simply be herself. The horses nickered softly as she passed, and she reached out to stroke the velvet nose of a chestnut mare. "What is her name?" she asked. "Seraphina, my lady. She's His Grace's favorite. He rides her every morning when he's in residence." Felicity felt a small flutter of curiosity. A man who rode every morning, who had a favorite horse, seemed somehow more human than the cold figure she had imagined. "Is the Duke kind to his horses?" she ventured. The boy's face lit up. "Oh, very much so, my lady. He knows each of them by name, tends to them himself sometimes. Says a man who cannot care for his animals has no business calling himself a gentleman." It was a small detail, but it lodged itself in Felicity's mind. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to the Duke than she had been led to believe. As she made her way back to the manor, she felt a fragile seed of hope take root. Maybe, just maybe, this marriage would not be the gilded cage she had feared. But she could not shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting, observing from the shadows. and in the days to come, that feeling would prove to be far more accurate than she could have ever imagined. Duke Dominic Ashford had always been a man of logic and reason. Emotion, in his view, was a distraction, a weakness that led to poor decisions and unnecessary complications. He had inherited his title at the age of 21, following his father's sudden death, and had spent the subsequent years transforming the Ashford estates into models of efficiency and prosperity. He was respected, even admired, but rarely liked, and that suited him perfectly well. The arrangement of his marriage to Lady Felicity Whitmore had been his late father's final wish, and Dominic had agreed to honor it without protest. Marriage, he reasoned, was a practical necessity. He needed an heir, and the Whitmore family was impeccable in lineage and fortune. The lady herself was said to be accomplished and beautiful, though Dominic placed little stock in such descriptions. Beauty faded, and accomplishments meant nothing if they were not paired with intelligence and character. But as the date of their first meeting drew near, doubt began to creep into his meticulously ordered mind. What if she were merely a fortune hunter, dazzled by his title and wealth? What if she were vapid and superficial, concerned only with gowns and gossip? Worse still, what if she were utterly indifferent to him, willing to marry for convenience, but incapable of genuine affection? Dominic had no illusions about love. He did not expect it, nor particularly desire it, but he refused to spend his life shackled to a woman who saw him as nothing more than a walking title. It was this fear that led him to devise his audacious plan. Rather than meet Lady Felicity as the Duke, surrounded by the trappings of formality and expectation, he would observe her in secret. He would disguise himself as a common groom, one of the many servants who worked in the stables, and watch her when she believed herself unobserved. Only then, he reasoned, would he see her true character. He shared his plan with no one, save his trusted valet, Mr. Hargrove, who had served the Ashford family for decades. Hargrove had been skeptical, warning that such a deception could backfire disastrously, but Dominic was resolute. "I will not enter into this marriage blindly," he insisted. "I must know who she is, not who she pretends to be." And so, on the very day Lady Felicity arrived at Thornfield Manor, Dominic was not detained by business on a northern estate, as Mr. Pemberton had been instructed to claim. Instead, he was in the servants' quarters, donning the rough wool clothing of a stable hand. Hargrove had arranged for him to take the place of a groom who had conveniently been sent on an errand to a distant village. With his face dirtied and his aristocratic bearing carefully concealed, Dominic descended to the stables, ready to begin his covert observation. The first time he saw Lady Felicity, she was standing at the window of her chambers, gazing out at the gardens. Even from a distance, he could see that the rumors of her beauty had not been exaggerated. She was slender and graceful, with auburn hair that caught the afternoon light. But it was her expression that arrested him, a look of profound melancholy, as if she carried the weight of the world on her delicate shoulders. Dominic felt an unexpected pang of something he could not quite name. Sympathy? Curiosity? He dismissed it and returned to his work. The following morning, when she appeared in the stables, Dominic was mucking out one of the stalls. He had positioned himself deliberately, ensuring he would be the one to interact with her if she ventured inside. When she did, accompanied by the young stable boy, Dominic kept his head down, listening intently as she spoke. Her voice was soft and musical, her questions genuine rather than condescending. She asked about the horses with real interest, not the feigned enthusiasm of someone seeking to impress. Dominic watched her from the corner of his eye as she stroked Seraphina's nose. There was a tenderness in her touch, a natural ease with the animals that spoke of a kind heart. When the boy mentioned that the Duke cared for his horses personally, Dominic saw her expression shift, a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. It was as if she were clinging to any scrap of information that might suggest he was not the monster she feared. Over the next few days, Dominic continued his charade. He was present whenever she visited the stables, which she did with increasing frequency, often bringing apples or carrots for the horses. She seemed to find solace there, away from the stifling formality of the manor. She spoke to the stable boy, to the other grooms, asking about their lives, their families. She remembered their names, inquired about their well-being. It was not the behavior of a haughty aristocrat, but of a woman who genuinely cared about others. Dominic found himself increasingly intrigued. She was not what he had expected. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a quiet strength beneath her delicate exterior. But he needed more. He needed to hear her speak freely, without the constraint of propriety, to truly understand who she was. His opportunity came on the 5th night of her stay. Dominic had taken to walking the grounds after dark, ensuring the estate was secure, a habit from his military days that he had never quite abandoned. On this particular evening, as he passed near the stables, he heard voices. Curious, he moved silently closer and peered through a gap in the wooden walls. Inside, Lady Felicity stood beside Seraphina's stall, speaking softly to the mare. She was alone, or so she believed. Her mother had retired early with a headache, and the servants were occupied elsewhere. Dominic watched, transfixed, as she stroked the horse's neck and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I suppose I should be grateful," she murmured. "This is the life I was born to, after all. A grand estate, a titled husband, every material comfort I could desire. But oh, Seraphina, I am so very frightened. Frightened that he will be cold and indifferent, that I will spend the rest of my days as nothing more than an ornament in his home. I do not ask for love. I know that is too much to hope for. But I wish he might at least see me, truly see me. Not just the fortune and the family name." Dominic's breath caught in his chest. Her words struck him with the force of a blow. She was not a fortune hunter, not a vapid socialite. She was a woman trapped by the same chains of duty and expectation that bound him, yearning for the very thing he had thought impossible, a connection that transcended obligation. Felicity continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I have practiced my smiles and my curtsies until I feel like a puppet. I have memorized all the things I am supposed to say, the way I am supposed to be. But what if none of it matters? What if he takes one look at me and sees only what everyone else sees, a commodity to be acquired, a vessel for producing heirs? I do not want to be invisible in my own life, Seraphina. I want to matter, even if just a little." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away quickly, as if ashamed of her own emotion. Dominic felt something crack open inside him, a wall he had built so carefully around his heart. This was not the woman he had feared. This was someone he could respect, someone who shared his own unspoken fears and desires. He stepped back from the stable wall, his mind reeling. His plan had succeeded. He had learned the truth about Lady Felicity Whitmore, but the truth was far more complicated and far more profound than he had anticipated. She was not his enemy. She was, in a strange and unexpected way, his equal, and the deception he had thought so clever now felt like a betrayal. Dominic returned to his chambers that night, still dressed in the rough clothing of a groom, and stared at his reflection in the mirror. What had he done? How could he possibly reveal himself now, knowing what he knew? If he appeared as the Duke tomorrow, she would never speak to him with the honesty she had shown to a horse. She would don her mask of perfection, and he would be forever shut out from the truth of who she was. But if he continued the deception, if he allowed her to believe he was merely a servant, he risked something far greater: her trust, her respect, and perhaps even the fragile connection that had begun to form between them without either of them fully realizing it. As dawn broke over Thornfield Manor, Dominic made his decision. He would end the charade, but not in the way Mr. Pemberton had planned. He would reveal himself, but he would do so in a manner that honored the woman who had bared her soul to a horse in the quiet darkness of a stable. He would give her the one thing she had asked for, the one thing he had never thought to offer anyone. He would truly see her. and he would ensure that she saw him too. The morning after her confession in the stables, Felicity woke with a strange sense of unease. She had poured out her heart to Serafina, believing herself entirely alone, and the act had left her feeling both lighter and more vulnerable. It was as if she had shed a protective layer, exposing the raw, frightened creature beneath. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of pale green muslin, and made her way down to breakfast with her mother. The Countess was in fine spirits, chattering about the upcoming meeting with the Duke. "Mr. Pemberton sent word that His Grace will return this very afternoon," she announced, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You must be ready, Felicity. This is your moment to secure his favor." Felicity nodded mutely, pushing the food around her plate. She had no appetite, her stomach twisting with apprehension. In a few short hours, she would finally meet the man who would determine the course of her entire life. The thought was suffocating. Unable to bear the confines of the manor any longer, she excused herself and fled to the stables once more. It had become her sanctuary, the one place where she could breathe freely. As she entered the cool, shadowed interior, she was surprised to find a different groom tending to the horses, a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair and striking blue eyes. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment their gazes locked. There was something unsettling about his stare, an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Good morning, my lady," he said, his voice low and measured. It was a cultivated voice, she realized with surprise, lacking the rough edges of the common servants. "Good morning," Felicity replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I do not believe we have met. Are you new to Thornfield?" "In a manner of speaking," he said, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I am Daniel, one of the grooms. I have been away, attending to business elsewhere on the estate." "I see." Felicity moved toward Serafina's stall, seeking the comfort of the mare's presence. The horse nickered softly, and Felicity stroked her neck, acutely aware of the groom's watchful eyes upon her. "You have a way with her," Daniel observed, stepping closer. "Serafina is not always so trusting of strangers. Perhaps she senses that I am as nervous as she is," Felicity said with a rueful smile. "I am to meet the Duke today, and I confess I am terrified." "Terrified?" Daniel's expression grew serious. "Why should you be terrified of your own betrothed?" Felicity hesitated, uncertain why she felt compelled to confide in this stranger. Perhaps it was the kindness in his eyes, or the fact that he was not part of the rigid hierarchy of the manor. "Because I do not know him," she admitted. "I do not know if he is kind or cruel, if he will value me for myself or merely for what I represent. I have been told all my life that my feelings do not matter, that duty is everything, but I cannot help wishing for something more." Daniel was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "If I may be so bold, my lady, I believe the Duke is not the man you fear. He is complicated, certainly, guarded, but he is not cruel. And I think, if you give him a chance, you may find that he wishes for the same things you do." Felicity looked at him in surprise. "You speak as if you know him well." "I have served this household for some time," Daniel replied carefully. "I have seen His Grace in moments when he believed himself unobserved. He is not the cold, unfeeling man society believes him to be. He is simply afraid of being used, of being seen as nothing more than a title and a fortune. Rather like you, I imagine." Felicity felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "You are very kind to say so," she whispered. "I hope you are right." "I am certain of it," Daniel said, and there was a conviction in his tone that comforted her more than any of her mother's assurances ever had. They stood together in companionable silence, the only sound the soft shuffling of the horses in their stalls. Felicity felt a strange connection to this groom, as if he understood her in a way no one else did. It was absurd, of course. He was a servant, and she was a lady. Their worlds were oceans apart, and yet, in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. "I should return to the manor," she said reluctantly. "My mother will be searching for me." "Of course, my lady," Daniel stepped back, inclining his head respectfully. "But before you go, may I offer one piece of advice?" "Please do." Be yourself," he said simply. "Do not hide behind the mask you have been taught to wear. The Duke will value your honesty far more than any pretense of perfection." Felicity felt her heart swell with gratitude. "Thank you, Daniel. You have given me courage when I had none." As she walked back to the manor, she found herself thinking about the groom's words. Be yourself. It was such a simple instruction, and yet it felt revolutionary. Could she truly cast aside the years of training, the endless lessons in propriety and restraint? Could she stand before the Duke and speak her mind, her heart, without fear of rejection? She did not know, but she was determined to try. That afternoon, the household was in a state of controlled chaos as word spread that the Duke had returned. Felicity was summoned to her chambers, where her mother and a team of maids fussed over her appearance with military precision. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style, adorned with delicate combs. Her gown, a creation of ivory, silk and lace, was so heavily corseted that she could barely draw breath. She felt like a porcelain doll, beautiful and lifeless. When she was finally deemed acceptable, she was escorted to the drawing room, where the Duke awaited. Her mother remained at her side, a silent sentinel ensuring that Felicity did not disgrace the family. As they entered the elegantly appointed room, Felicity's eyes immediately sought out the figure standing by the fireplace, and her breath stopped. The Duke was tall and imposing, dressed impeccably in a dark coat and pristine cravat. His features were strong and aristocratic, his bearing one of absolute authority, but it was his eyes that held her transfixed, piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her, eyes she had seen before. "Lady Felicity," he said, stepping forward and bowing, "I am Duke Dominic Ashford. It is a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance." Felicity sank into a curtsy, her mind reeling. It was impossible. The voice, the eyes, the way he held himself. It was Daniel, the groom from the stables. But how could that be? How could the Duke have been masquerading as a servant in his own household? She rose slowly, her legs trembling, and forced herself to meet his gaze. He was watching her intently, a question in his eyes, as if daring her to call him out. For a moment she was too stunned to speak, too overwhelmed by the implications of what she had just realized. He had heard her. That night in the stables, when she had confessed her fears to Serafina, he had been there. He had heard every word, every vulnerable admission. The knowledge sent a wave of humiliation crashing over her, followed swiftly by a surge of anger. He had deceived her, manipulated her into revealing herself while he remained hidden behind a false identity. But then she remembered his words, spoken as Daniel. He is simply afraid of being used, of being seen as nothing more than a title and a fortune, rather like you, I imagine. He had not been mocking her, he had been revealing himself in the only way he knew how. He had been as vulnerable as she, seeking the same truth. Felicity took a steadying breath and summoned every ounce of composure she possessed. "Your Grace," she said, her voice remarkably steady, "the pleasure is mine. I have heard much about you, though I confess none of it has prepared me for the reality." A flicker of something, relief, admiration, crossed the Duke's face. "I could say the same, Lady Felicity. You are not at all what I expected." "I hope that is not a disappointment," she replied, a hint of challenge in her tone. "On the contrary," he said softly, "it is the very opposite." The Countess, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension between them, clapped her hands together. "How wonderful! I can see you two will get along splendidly. Now, shall we take tea?" As they moved to sit, Felicity's mind raced. The Duke, Dominic, had gone to extraordinary lengths to know her true character. It was unorthodox, even shocking, but it was also strangely honorable. He had not wanted a marriage based on lies and pretense, any more than she did. And in disguising himself, he had given her the opportunity to be honest in a way she never could have been otherwise. Perhaps, she thought, This marriage would not be the prison she had feared. Perhaps against all odds, it would be something else entirely, a partnership built on mutual understanding and respect. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and misunderstandings. But for the first time since her betrothal had been announced, Felicity felt a spark of genuine hope. And as she glanced at the Duke, at Dominic, she saw that same spark reflected in his eyes. They had both taken a leap of faith, risking everything for a chance at something real. Now the question was whether they had the courage to see it through. The days following Felicity's first formal meeting with the Duke were marked by a cautious dance of revelation and restraint. They took meals together, walked the gardens, and engaged in polite conversation under the ever-watchful eyes of the Countess and the household staff. To the outside observer, they were the picture of an ideal, aristocratic match, gracious, reserved, and perfectly matched in breeding and fortune. But beneath the surface, a different story was unfolding. Dominic had expected Felicity to confront him about his deception, to demand an explanation or express her outrage. Instead, she had said nothing, choosing instead to observe him with the same careful scrutiny he had once turned upon her. It was disconcerting, this reversal of roles, and Dominic found himself increasingly unsettled by her silence. What was she thinking? Did she despise him for his duplicity? Or had she perhaps understood his motives in a way he had not dared hope? For her part, Felicity was grappling with a tumult of conflicting emotions. The initial shock and humiliation had given way to a reluctant understanding. The Duke had not set out to mock or manipulate her. He had been seeking the same truth she craved, but his methods had been invasive, a violation of her privacy that she could not entirely forgive. And yet she could not deny the strange intimacy that had formed between them as a result. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, and instead of retreating, he had chosen to reveal himself to her in turn. It was this complexity, this refusal to fit neatly into the categories of villain or hero, that fascinated her. One afternoon, as they strolled through the rose garden, Dominic finally broke the silence that had stretched between them for days. "You know, don't you," he said abruptly, his voice low, "about my time in the stables." Felicity paused beside a late-blooming rose bush, her fingers tracing the delicate petals. "I suspected from the moment I saw you in the drawing room," she admitted. "Your eyes gave you away. They are rather distinctive, Your Grace." Dominic winced at the formality of her tone. "I owe you an apology," he said, stepping closer. "What I did was unforgivable. I had no right to spy on you, to trick you into revealing yourself. I told myself it was necessary, that I needed to know the truth. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid to meet you honestly, afraid of what I might find." Felicity turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "And what did you find, Your Grace? Was it worth the deception?" "I found," Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion, "a woman of courage and compassion, a woman who sees beyond titles and wealth to the human beings beneath. I found someone who is as trapped by duty and expectation as I am, and who yearns for the same impossible dream, a life of meaning and connection." Felicity felt her breath catch. "Then why did you not simply tell me? Why maintain the pretense?" "Because I am a fool," Dominic said bluntly, "and because I did not know how to bridge the chasm between who I am and who I am expected to be. But I am telling you now, Felicity, I am asking for your forgiveness and for a chance to begin again, not as the Duke and the Lady, but as Dominic and Felicity. Two people who might, if they are very fortunate, find something real in this arrangement we have both been forced into." Felicity studied him for a long moment, her heart warring with her mind. He had hurt her, yes, but he had also given her a gift she had not known she needed, the assurance that she was seen, truly seen, for who she was. And that, she realized, was worth more than any apology. "Very well," she said at last, a small smile playing at her lips. "But if we are to begin again, you must promise me one thing. Anything. No more deceptions, no more masks. If this marriage is to be anything more than a transaction, it must be built on honesty. Dominic felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "You have my word," he said solemnly. "From this moment forward, I will be nothing but honest with you." "Then I forgive you," Felicity said, extending her hand, "and I would very much like to know the real Dominic Ashford." He took her hand, and for the first time, the touch felt like a promise rather than a formality. Over the following weeks, a tentative friendship blossomed between them. Dominic introduced Felicity to the workings of the estate, taking her on tours of the tenant farms and explaining the intricacies of land management. She, in turn, shared her love of literature and music, playing the pianoforte for him in the evenings and reading aloud from her favorite novels. They discovered shared passions and complementary strengths, and slowly the wall of formality between them began to crumble. But their burgeoning connection did not go unnoticed or unchallenged. Among the guests invited to Thornfield for a grand ball celebrating the betrothal was Lord Everett Sterling, a childhood friend of Dominic's and a man of considerable charm and ambition. Sterling had long coveted the influence that came with proximity to the Duke, and he had assumed, as had many others, that Dominic's marriage would be a cold, strategic arrangement. The sight of the Duke and his betrothed walking together, laughing in genuine enjoyment, filled him with a jealous resentment he could not quite suppress. "How domestic you've become, Ashford," Sterling remarked one evening as they stood in the library, brandy in hand. "One would almost think you had fallen in love with the chit." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Lady Felicity is to be my wife," he said evenly. "I fail to see why that should surprise anyone." "Oh, come now," Sterling said with a smirk. "We both know this was an arrangement between your fathers. You need not pretend affection for my sake. Unless, of course, she has bewitched you with her feminine wiles." "Careful, Sterling," Dominic warned, his voice dangerously quiet. "You are speaking of the future Duchess of Ashford." Sterling raised his hands in mock surrender. "No offense intended, old friend. I merely find it curious that you, of all people, would allow sentiment to cloud your judgment. A wife is a necessary evil, nothing more. One must have an heir, after all. But to actually enjoy her company, that strikes me as inefficient." Dominic set his glass down with a sharp click. "Perhaps that is why you remain unmarried, Sterling. You cannot imagine a partnership that is anything more than a transaction. Lady Felicity is not a necessary evil. She is an intelligent, accomplished woman, and I am fortunate to have her." Sterling's eyes gleamed with malice. "How very noble. I wonder if she would be as enamored of you if she knew the full extent of your unconventional methods of courtship. Does she know, for instance, that you spied on her like some common criminal?" Dominic felt his blood run cold. "How did you—" "I have my sources," Sterling said smugly. "Servants talk, Ashford. And this particular tale has been making the rounds. A duke masquerading as a groom. It's positively scandalous. I can only imagine what society would make of it if the story were to become public." "Are you threatening me?" Dominic demanded, his hands clenching into fists. "Not at all," Sterling replied smoothly. "I am merely observing that some secrets are better kept quiet, for everyone's sake." The implication was clear. Sterling expected favors, influence, or some form of compensation in exchange for his silence. It was blackmail, pure and simple, and Dominic felt a surge of fury. But before he could respond, the library door opened, and Felicity entered, her expression bright and unsuspecting. "Dominic, your mother has arrived and wishes to—" She stopped short, sensing the tension in the room. "Forgive me, I did not mean to interrupt." "You are not interrupting," Dominic said quickly, moving to her side. "Lord Sterling was just leaving." Sterling offered an exaggerated bow. "Lady Felicity, always a pleasure. I look forward to the ball tomorrow evening. I am certain it will be unforgettable." As Sterling departed, Felicity looked up at Dominic with concern. "What did he mean by that?" she asked quietly. Dominic hesitated, torn between his promise of honesty and his desire to protect her from the ugliness of Sterling's threats. But he had given his word, and he would not break it. "He knows," he said simply, "about my time in the stables, and he intends to use that knowledge to his advantage." Felicity's eyes widened, but then, to Dominic's surprise, she squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. "Then we shall face it together," she said firmly. "I will not allow that man to manipulate you, or to cast a shadow over what we have built. If the truth must come out, then so be it. We have nothing to be ashamed of." Dominic felt a surge of admiration and something deeper, something that made his heart ache with unexpected tenderness. "You are extraordinary," he murmured, taking her hand. "I am practical," Felicity corrected with a small smile, "and I refuse to live in fear of society's judgment. We shall attend the ball, hold our heads high, and show them that we are united. Let Sterling do his worst. We will not be cowed." And in that moment, Dominic knew with absolute certainty that he had not merely found a suitable wife. He had found a partner, an ally, and perhaps, though it seemed too miraculous to believe, a woman he could love with his whole heart. Tomorrow's ball would be a test, a crucible that would either forge their bond or shatter it beyond repair. But whatever came, they would face it together. The night of the ball arrived with an air of electric anticipation. Thornfield Manor had been transformed into a glittering spectacle, with hundreds of candles casting a warm glow over the grand ballroom. Members of the highest echelons of society had gathered to celebrate the betrothal of Duke Dominic Ashford and Lady Felicity Whitmore, and the atmosphere was thick with curiosity and speculation. Felicity stood before the mirror in her chambers, her hands trembling slightly as her maid fastened the final clasp of her necklace, a magnificent string of sapphires that had belonged to Dominic's mother. The gown she wore was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light with every movement. She looked every inch the future duchess, but inside, her nerves were frayed. Dominic had warned her that Sterling might cause trouble, and she had resolved to stand firm. But the prospect of facing the cruel judgment of society, of having her most private moments dissected and ridiculed, filled her with dread. She had spent her entire life trying to meet impossible standards of perfection, and now she was about to step into a room where her every flaw would be magnified and weaponized against her. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her mother or one of the servants. Instead, Dominic entered, resplendent in his formal attire. He closed the door behind him and crossed the room to stand beside her. "You look breathtaking," he said quietly, his eyes filled with warmth. "Thank you," Felicity murmured. "I confess, I am terrified." "As am I," Dominic admitted. "But we will face this together, just as you said. And no matter what happens, Felicity, I want you to know something." He took both of her hands in his grip warm and steady. "I have spent my entire life believing that emotions were a weakness, that allowing myself to care for someone would leave me vulnerable. But you have shown me that the opposite is true. It is in connection, in honesty, in allowing oneself to be seen, that true strength is found. You have given me that gift, and I am more grateful than I can express." Felicity felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Dominic." "I am not finished," he said with a gentle smile. "I do not know if I am capable of the grand romantic gestures that novels speak of, but I want you to know that I see you, Felicity. I see your courage, your kindness, your intelligence, and I am honored to stand beside you, not as your superior or your master, but as your equal and your partner." A tear slipped down Felicity's cheek, and she did not bother to brush it away. "I see you too," she whispered, "and I am no longer afraid." "Beat." He leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a gesture so tender that it made her heart ache. "Then let us go down and show them what a true partnership looks like." The ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and elegant coats as Dominic and Felicity made their entrance. All eyes turned to them, and a hush fell over the assembled guests. Felicity held her head high, her hand resting lightly on Dominic's arm, and together they descended the grand staircase. The evening proceeded with the expected formalities, dances, toasts, and polite conversation. Felicity found herself surrounded by ladies eager to ingratiate themselves, while Dominic was cornered by gentlemen seeking favor or influence. But throughout it all, they remained acutely aware of each other, their gazes meeting across the crowded room like silent reassurances. It was during the supper interval that Sterling made his move. He approached Felicity as she stood near the refreshment table, a glass of champagne in hand, and offered a bow that was just a shade too familiar. "Lady Felicity, how radiant you look this evening. The Duke is a fortunate man indeed." "Thank you, Lord Sterling," Felicity replied coolly, sensing the malice beneath his honeyed words. "I must confess, I find your betrothal quite fascinating," Sterling continued, his voice pitched just loud enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. "One hears the most extraordinary stories about how it all came to pass, tales of disguises and secret observations. Quite the scandal, if true." Felicity felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her expression serene. "I am afraid I do not follow, Lord Sterling. What are you implying?" Sterling's smile widened, revealing a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Oh, merely that the Duke is not quite the paragon of honor he presents himself to be. But then, I suppose you already know that. After all, you were the unwitting subject of his little experiment, were you not?" A murmur rippled through the guests within earshot, and Felicity felt the weight of their collective judgment pressing down upon her. This was the moment Sterling had been waiting for, the perfect opportunity to humiliate both her and Dominic before the entire ton. But Felicity had not come this far to be cowed by a petty, vindictive man. She set down her glass with deliberate care and turned to face Sterling, her voice clear and unwavering. "Lord Sterling, you are correct in one regard. The Duke did observe me before our formal introduction, and do you know what he saw? He saw a woman who values honesty over pretense, who cares for the well-being of others, and who refuses to be defined solely by her title and fortune. Just as I saw in him a man who is willing to question convention, to seek truth rather than accept easy lies, and to honor his commitments with integrity." She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving Sterling's. "You speak of scandal, but the only scandal I see here is a man who would use private matters to advance his own petty ambitions. The Duke and I have nothing to hide, no secrets that shame us. Our courtship may have been unconventional, but it has been rooted in mutual respect and a shared desire for an honest partnership. Can you say the same of your own relationships, Lord Sterling? Or do you surround yourself only with those who can be manipulated and used?" The ballroom had fallen utterly silent, every guest hanging on Felicity's words. Sterling's face had turned an alarming shade of red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Before he could formulate a response, Dominic appeared at Felicity's side, his presence commanding and protective. "Lady Felicity speaks the truth," Dominic said, his voice ringing through the ballroom. "I will not apologize for seeking to know the character of the woman I was to marry. Society would have me accept an arrangement blindly, to treat my wife as nothing more than a decorative object. But I refused to do so. I wanted to know Felicity, her mind, her heart, her true self. And in doing so, I discovered a woman of extraordinary courage and compassion. If that is scandalous, then I am proud to be scandalous." He turned to address the assembled guests directly. "I know that many of you view marriage as a transaction, a strategic alliance devoid of genuine feeling. But I believe we can aspire to something greater. Lady Felicity and I are building a partnership based on honesty, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to living authentically. If that challenges your notions of propriety, so be it. We will not apologize for choosing each other truly and freely." The silence stretched for a heartbeat. Two, and then, from the back of the room, A single pair of hands began to clap. Felicity turned to see an elderly woman, the Dowager Duchess of Somerset, rising from her seat. "Well said, Your Grace," the Dowager called out, her voice strong and approving. "It is about time someone in this room had the courage to speak the truth. I, for one, applaud your unconventional courtship. The ton could use a bit more honesty and a bit less hypocrisy." Slowly, others began to join in the applause, and soon the entire ballroom was filled with the sound of clapping hands. Sterling, his face a mask of humiliated fury, turned on his heel and stalked from the room. Felicity felt a wave of relief wash over her, so intense that her knees nearly buckled. Dominic steadied her, his arm slipping around her waist. "You were magnificent," he murmured, his voice filled with admiration. "We were magnificent," Felicity corrected, leaning into his warmth. Together. As the evening wore on, guests approached them in a steady stream, offering congratulations and expressing their approval of the match. The scandal Sterling had hoped to create had instead become a triumph, a bold declaration that challenged the rigid conventions of Regency society. But more importantly, it had solidified the bond between Dominic and Felicity. They had faced their greatest test and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. They had chosen each other, publicly and irrevocably, and in doing so, they had laid the foundation for a marriage built on something far more enduring than duty or obligation. As they danced together beneath the glittering chandeliers, Felicity looked up into Dominic's eyes and saw reflected there the same wonder and gratitude she felt in her own heart. They had been given a rare gift, the chance to forge their own path, to create a life of meaning and connection in a world that so often denied such possibilities, and they would not waste it. 6 months had passed since the ball at Thornfield Manor, and the world of Duke Dominic Ashford and Duchess Felicity Ashford had undergone a transformation as profound as the one they had each experienced individually. They had married in a quiet ceremony, attended only by close family and friends, eschewing the grand spectacle that society had expected. It was a deliberate choice, a reflection of the values they had come to share: authenticity over ostentation, substance over show. The Dowager Duchess of Somerset had attended, offering her blessing and a knowing smile, while the Countess of Whitmore had finally ceased her relentless campaign for perfection, grudgingly admitting that her daughter had chosen wisely. Now, as spring painted the Derbyshire countryside in vibrant shades of green and gold, Felicity stood in the library of Thornfield Manor, surrounded by maps and ledgers. She had taken an active role in the management of the estate, working alongside Dominic to implement progressive reforms that improved the lives of the tenant farmers. It was work that gave her a sense of purpose she had never known, and she threw herself into it with passion and determination. Dominic entered the library, his expression one of mingled exhaustion and satisfaction. He had just returned from a tour of the northern estates, where he had overseen the construction of new cottages and the establishment of a school for the tenant children. "I believe we have finally convinced old Mr. Patterson to try crop rotation," he announced, dropping into a chair beside her. "It took 3 hours of debate, but he has agreed to a trial." Felicity laughed, the sound light and genuine. "You are nothing if not persistent. I'm certain it will prove successful, and then the others will follow suit." "I hope so," Dominic said, reaching for her hand. "None of this would be possible without you, you know. Your ideas, your compassion, it has changed everything." Felicity squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with affection. "We are partners, remember? We change things together." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the afternoon sun streaming through the tall windows. It was in moments like these, Felicity reflected, that she felt most grateful for the strange, unconventional path that had brought them together. The man who had once disguised himself as a groom, driven by fear and mistrust, had become her confidant. her ally and her dearest friend. And somewhere along the way, without either of them quite realizing it, friendship had blossomed into something deeper, a love that was all the more precious because it had been freely chosen. "Have you heard from Lord Sterling?" Felicity asked, unable to suppress her curiosity. Dominic's expression darkened slightly. "He has retreated to his estate in Yorkshire. Rumour has it that his attempts to ingratiate himself with other members of the ton have been met with considerable skepticism. His reputation has suffered after the ball, and he has few allies left. I confess, I feel a measure of pity for him," Felicity said thoughtfully. "He is so consumed by ambition and jealousy that he cannot see the value of genuine connection." "Your compassion is one of the many reasons I love you," Dominic said softly, and Felicity felt her breath catch. They had spoken of affection, of partnership, of respect. But this was the first time either of them had spoken the word love aloud. Felicity turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his. "Do you mean that?" she whispered. "I do," Dominic said, his voice steady and sure. "I love you, Felicity. Not because you are beautiful or accomplished, or because you have proven yourself an invaluable partner in managing this estate. I love you because you are brave enough to be yourself, because you see the world not as it is, but as it could be, because you looked at a man who had deceived you and chose to forgive him, to give him a chance to be better. You have made me better, and I am grateful for every moment we share." Tears spilled down Felicity's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I never thought I could be this happy, Dominic. I thought my life was predetermined, a script written by others. But you gave me the freedom to choose, to be more than what was expected of me. You gave me a life worth living." Dominic pulled her into his arms, and they held each other as the golden afternoon light bathed the library in warmth. It was not a perfect life. There were still challenges to face, disagreements to navigate, and a society that did not always understand or approve of their choices. But it was their life, built on honesty, mutual respect, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. As summer approached, Felicity discovered that she was with child, and the news filled the household with quiet joy. Dominic was at turns elated and terrified, fussing over her with a tenderness that made her laugh and reassured her that he would be a devoted father. One afternoon, as they walked through the gardens together, Felicity paused beside the stables, the very place where their story had truly begun. Serafina was grazing in the nearby paddock, her chestnut coat gleaming in the sunlight. "Do you ever regret it?" Felicity asked, glancing up at Dominic. "The way we began?" Dominic considered the question carefully. "I regret the deception," he said honestly. "I regret that I did not have the courage to meet you honestly from the start, but I do not regret what it taught me. That true connection requires vulnerability, that love cannot flourish in a garden of lies. If I had approached you as the Duke, surrounded by formality and expectation, I do not know if we would have ever truly seen each other. Perhaps we needed those first honest conversations," Felicity mused. "The ones where we were simply Felicity and Daniel, two people speaking without the weight of titles and duty." "Perhaps," Dominic agreed. "And perhaps that is the lesson we can pass on to our child, that it is not the circumstances of our birth or the expectations of society, but the choices we make and the honesty with which we live that define us." Felicity smiled, resting her hand on her still flat abdomen. "I like that lesson very much." They continued their walk hand in hand, their future stretching before them like the blooming gardens of Thornfield, full of possibility, nurtured by care, and rooted in the fertile soil of truth and love. Years later, when their story was told in drawing rooms and parlours across England, it would be spoken of as a scandalous tale. The Duke who posed as a groom, the lady who defied convention. But for Dominic and Felicity, it was simply their story, a testament to the transformative power of choosing each other, truly and freely, against all odds. They had bloomed where they were planted, Not because the soil was perfect, but because they had tended to it together, with honesty, courage, and an abiding love that grew stronger with each passing season. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves a good historical romance. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Which character resonated with you most? And don't forget to tell me where in the world you're listening from. Until next time, keep believing in the power of choosing your own path and finding love in the most unexpected places.